So I want to, this time I'm going to turn it over to Chris Miller. I'm going to let you run the meeting from now on, at least until you're through with your presentation. Thank you for your attention, everyone.
Great. Thank you so much, Greg, and thank you for the opportunity to present. I'm not sure who's running the slides. If whoever that is can pull up the slide deck, or I can pull it up on my end, but probably easier if someone can do it. Aggie?
Aggie's running them, so.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So I became a Rotarian in 2009 for Los Gatos Morning Rotary. I was actually a founding member of the Silicon Valley Rotaract Club in 2003 at Santa Clara University, and worked as a school teacher for a few years, and had a difficult time, being able to commit to joining a service club. And then in 2009, I joined Los Gatos Morning Rotary. I was actually serving on the Los Gatos Union School District Board of Trustees at the time. I was elected in 2004 and served 2 terms on the school board, completing my second term, and deciding not to run again in 2012. In 2011, there was a news article that hit the Los Gatos Patch, and it's there in the chat. And essentially, it's elementary school kids formed service club. And the Los Gatos Kiwanis had started a service club at Van Meter Elementary School in Los Gatos. And then subsequently Blossom Hill started a service club, a Kiwanis club, or what they call K-Kids Club at Blossom Hill. And I was thinking, well, where is Rotary? The Kiwanis have gotten to the younger members of our town, and where is Rotary in that? And so I am a firm believer that the earlier kids are exposed to the idea of service, the better, not just for the sake of service, but also for organizational membership purposes. You might be surprised to find out there are actually several existing Rotary programs that focus on elementary education within Rotary, or focused on those in primary school. And some of those include Rota Kids, which I've also put in the link. And that is they have put on their website a number of different resources for clubs that are geared towards the younger level around the world. So if you click on that link, that you will see pretty much on all continents except for Antarctica, there is a Rota Kids club. So it's important to note that these are not officially Rotary sanctioned programs, rather district programs. For all intents and purposes, RI as a worldwide organization doesn't formally support or recognize programs for youth under the age of 12. As referenced in the enactment proposal, there have been several attempts to get the programs that I mentioned, Rota Kids, also Early Act, Kids Act, formally recognized by Rotary through the Council on Legislation and the Council on Resolutions, and those will likely continue. Based upon conversations I've had with top-level Rotary leaders, including Broad Howard in our district, there is much concern that formally recognizing these programs would dilute the Rotary brand. As such, the proposal that was put together and passed by my club allows for Interact programs to exist in elementary schools around the world, which already essentially exists at district levels, but not recognized as official RI programs. So I'm happy to take any questions on this enactment.
This is Fernando for the San Jose Rotary, downtown San Jose. Can I ask a question?
Go ahead, please.
Yeah.
Yes, of course.
Yeah. I think probably the most convincing argument I would imagine you can make is to give examples of other service clubs that are doing exactly that, and that they're doing this, and it's being done around the world evidently, It's just that we're not doing it because we have some idea that this would dilute our Rotary brand. I don't see how that would happen if you're getting children involved in the concept of service. But I encourage you to get as many examples of other clubs and other activities that reflect that to bolster your argument that we ought to do the same.
Great, thank you. That's a
Um,
good point.
I'm going to, so I'm going to take hands in the participant window if you have questions. I see you, Oren, but Stuart's got his hand up. So Stuart, then Oren.
So I
Stuart?
met with, so thanks, Chris. This is very interesting. I met with our youth services team and we discussed it. They had a number of questions primarily related to reaching all the way down to 5 years old. So, if you could comment on two things specifically, do you really intend to have clubs that go all the way down to 5 years old? And then the second thing that they were concerned about was relative to the amount of supervision and requirements for things like, appropriate youth oversight down below the 12-year-old age, that we rely on the Interact clubs, the school district to provide some supervision, but we know that in the 12 and up range, the students are pretty capable, and they were quite concerned about risk and activities without adequate supervision down that low. So.
Great, thank you, Stuart. Great questions. So I'll be perfectly candid with you. Age 5, that came from the Early Act and Rota Kids World existing programs. So it's simply, those are what, and I'm going to put the Early Act link in the chat for anyone that might be interested. So age 5 really came from those programs where they already exist. I do agree with you. I am an educator by trade. I currently working with high school students, but I have had some experience with elementary students, and I think there are ways that you can incorporate the concept of service even with 5 or 6-year-olds. I don't imagine a full-blown Interact program that we would consider at a middle school or high school at the kindergarten or first grade level. I don't envision that, but I think that what you could do is have a club that meets once a month or something like that, that focuses on service and instilling the concept of serving others through serving others in an elementary school.
Oh, hold on.
Oren?
Yes, Stuart, wait.
But Stuart was muted, but
Yes,
still
Stuart,
wanted to say something.
Stuart got muted somehow. Can you unmute Stuart? I know you were still talking.
Yeah. So,
Sorry.
So Chris, thank you for that explanation. I'll take it back to him. But their concern was if you open it up to be like Interact, that some clubs could sort of turn it loose like a regular Interact, as opposed to providing some additional guidance. And so I think, assuming this goes forward, I would hope that you would either try to build in something or create something that makes it clear that it's different in elementary school. Like you, I'm an educator. I taught 5th and 6th grade. And that would be even that would be hard for me to see some of these kids doing things unsupervised, without way more supervision, and down all the way to 5, 6, 1st and 2nd grade. I think it has to be very handheld. Our club has some activities with middle and elementary schools that we did give them a guided program, but we would never call it an Interact club.
Oren,
Thank you.
hand up?
So now, Oren, you have your hand up?
Yeah, no, so, and I'm not, even though Stuart and I are in the same club, I'm not involved in the youth service there. So this is just me separately, but similar issues. I think 2 issues. One is, Interact clubs, Chris, as you know, are fairly independent organizations. They manage themselves, and we have a liaison, but they're, they structure themselves and do their own thing, which obviously at this level we couldn't do it. And going to the brand thing, I just encourage you to think about the pluses and minuses using the Interact label for this versus creating or elaborating or formalizing some of the other things that you talked about earlier as a separate type of organization, which have a separate structure. That's all.
Well, thank you, Orin. I appreciate that. And I mean, I can't speak for anybody, but what I can tell you is that I know Rotary has spent a huge amount of money in branding and marketing. And my understanding and conversations that I've had with leaders at the senior level within Rotary is that if you start adding, multiple programs that are, RI recognized, then, it dilutes that. So, I mean, I hear what you're saying. And I mean, to be honest with you, we don't have any Interact programs at the elementary level in our district. And I don't.
We have middle school though, right?
Correct. There is middle school. And I don't envision, if this does indeed becoming adopted, I think that, locally we would look at that and see, with my youth service chair hat on for the district, look to see if there are some ways to, incorporate some elementary schools. But I just got so frustrated, to be honest with you, of seeing at pretty much every council meeting or council legislation and council and resolutions in the last 10 years, there's been these early act, Rota Kids. There's another one that Kids Act that have come forward and they've all been shot down. And so my perspective is, okay, well, let's lower it to age 5, keep it as Interact, and then that would allow for the program to expand across the world.
All right, thanks.
So Chris, there are 3 more people that at least want to make comments. First, Jill Dorig, then Fernando, and then Geeta. So Jill, you want to unmute yourself? You got a comment in the chat?
Yeah, I just, I was curious whether we can kind of ease into this. I'm a little nervous with little people, mainly probably because I have a 2nd grader and a 4th grader in the house right now that are, they require a lot of management and time. So I think that it would be prudent if we ease into it, maybe by partnering with some organization that already works with children of that age. And whether it's Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, Brownie Scouts, whatever, a lot of times they have badges, and maybe we can say, shall we mentor, the service badge or something like that, that we could start making contacts with kids that way and see how it works. We could find that, nah, this is just too much. These kids are just too young for us to have the time to provide them the oversight that they need at that age.
And I might add in the chat before we get to Fernando, Stuart also recommends maybe we move it from 12 to 10. And I think Hilda also said maybe 4th and 5th graders, but not much younger. So I see also Fernando, then Geeta. And then Cindy.
Before we go to Fernando, I would like to ask Joe Hamilton a procedural question.
Sure.
And that is, first of all, sorry, I just got distracted. Yes, this would be for the council and legislation. So this is something that, at the international level, it would go through, the council. Maybe you could explain the enactment process, Joe.
Sure, I'd be happy to. Basically, any Rotarian in the world can propose an enactment so long as that enactment is sent in to the council by December 31st of this year, even though the council is in 2022. The process is that, first of all, whoever is proposing it has to get their club to approve of that proposal for enactment. And Chris has 2 of them. This is one of the 2. Following that, it has to be approved by a majority of the clubs in the district. We've sort of set an arbitrary date of November 15th for clubs to send in that approval. And then the final step is that the governor also has to approve. So once all that's done, the proposal for enactment is sent back to the council. They can make comments or suggest changes. So that's the process. And Chris, so far, is the only Rotarian from the only club that has proposals that are being set forth. So that's the basis of our discussion here today.
Yeah, so
Thank you.
hence the conversation, Chris, because obviously Chris brought this up to get feedback because we're the clubs. I mean, we're the presidents of the club, so.
Right. And I do want to, Joe, one procedural question, and that is, I have gotten feedback from, some clubs about age 5. And as I stated earlier, that age really just came about because of existing programs. If if Los Gatos Morning Rotary wanted to modify the proposed enactment, I would assume we would need to go back for a club vote, and then there would be another separate district vote. Is that correct? Or is at this point it's not, it can be modified at this point then?
That is correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, so there's more people who have comments and thoughts on this. First, Fernando, then Geeta, then Cindy. Fernando?
Okay, I thought that going to these clubs, these other clubs, or even these other programs that you've mentioned, the Early Act and Rotary Kids, those questions that have been raised here by our president, those questions can be asked of those clubs to find out how they dealt with this particular issue, because it cannot be something that just occurred to us about these questions. These questions must have arisen and they must have resolved them in some way for them to have those as programs or projects that they are undertaking. So it seems to me that we ought to be able to find out some answers from these other clubs as what they did. Did they find that 5 years old was too young, or did they find that 5 years old was not a problem, or did they find that it wasn't a problem to oversee these children of such a tender age? Or, certainly those questions can be asked before we go very far with this. Thank you.
And next, Geeta, you had your hand up. Are you still there? Yeah, unmute yourself. Thanks.
So, Chris, this is a great idea. I know that the elementary school kids, your educators, Stuart knows this too. I think they start their first grade by age 6 here. So 5 would be in pre-school age, right? So they'll be going to some kindergarten or undergrad or whatever they do. I don't have grandkids, so I can't remember my kids. They're all old. So I was just thinking maybe 6 would be a good section to have, because then you can just target on primary schools. You already have middle school and high school. So maybe that'll be a good way to start. But I agree with some of the comments that people are writing that 6 may be too young, maybe 7, they kind of know the lay of the land in school. So they may be ready. My neighbor kids are ready, I know. They're matured enough to do good things, and parents are also teaching them to do good things. So this is a great idea to start at a younger age. So probably you should let them ease into the grade 1 and then start from grade 2 to 5. And then you have 6, 7, 8 anyways. So that may work out really well. And this is a great way to get new members. Parents can be more involved, and who knows, our membership will grow.
Thank you.
Yeah, so Cindy, I think you had your hand up. Did you take it down?
Yes, okay. Thank you, Chris. Our club, Scotts Valley, did review the proposal, those 2 enactments at our meeting this Monday, as well as by email. And we do have a good support. They approved it. We like the idea and the concept. And I know, as some of you already mentioned, my own personal impression was 5 was pretty early, was young. And I logged on after you already started speaking, so I just caught part of the information about the Early Act and Rota Kids. But as Fernando mentioned, by maybe checking with those groups, I can see Geeta's comments about maybe raising that age to 7. However, I believe if those 2 other existing groups are functioning and doing doing what it was set up to do, to educate the young people about service. And they're doing it. We hear lots of news about kids as early as 5 saving all their pennies or doing something, making food for the homeless. You hear about it all the time on the news. Younger and younger children, youth doing projects. So what I'm getting to is if the legislation goes through and they decide to raise that age, is there any way to grandfather those early ACT group and Rota kids? They've already started at 5 years old. They're doing, and if they're doing what they're intended to do, it seems like such a slap, to them, saying, well, why can't we be accepted? You know where I'm going with this? So those are some of my thoughts, but we did approve it. I did send our vote on to Olivia. And I know there's lots of tweaking and questions. All the questions are very valid, and comments about especially the age. Cub Scouts, another group. I work with Cub Scouts and they started young, but they still have to be supervised and whatever. So thank you.
Great. Thank you. And I know we have one other proposed enactment, so I want to make sure there's time for that.
All right, well, there's no more hands, so why don't you go ahead, Chris, and do the other enactment?
Okay, great. Thank you. So the second enactment will create a standing Rotary International Committee on Interact. So there are currently 6 standing committees within Rotary. And a standing committee basically means that it's required under the Rotary's bylaws. And in 2010, there actually was a Council on Legislation enactment that was passed that created an Interact committee and put it in the Rotaract to form the Rotaract Interact Committee. We actually have a former chair of that committee on the call. Mitty Chang was a former chair of that committee a few years back. In 2019, the Council on Legislation voted to remove Interact from that committee. According to RI staff, and this is what's included in the enactment language itself, the reason for the proposed change of removing Interact from the committee was an operational one, writing, quote, "We find it challenging to create a balance for supporting both of these Rotaract and Interact programs through the same committee, since their needs, strategies, issues are inherently different." So once upon a time, there was, as recently as 2015, there were 5 committees focusing on youth, 4 ad hoc and the 1 standing Rotaract Interact. According to the current RI official directory, there are currently no committees focused on youth. So while the RI president does have the ability to create a committee, ad hoc committee, quite honestly, the presidents themselves come and go. As I mentioned here, the time is right for RI to establish a 7th standing committee referenced in RI bylaws as RI presidents and priorities come and go.
If you have any questions or thoughts, raise your hand. Cindy has another thought. Cindy? And you're muted, Cindy. Unmute.
Our youth was added as the 5th avenue of service a few years back. And I know Ron Secco from my club was the one who presented it as the legislation. And I really believe, my own personal feeling, and I think many of our members in our club, and our youth is very important, a very important program. I think it should have a standing, my personal view is it should have a standing committee, because that's our focus. It has been a big focus of RI since we've added it. Interact is very strong. And if we get a RILA, our district with RILA. So my personal view is that we should really encourage putting that through.
Cindy, did your club vote to approve this one as well?
Yes, we did.
Okay, good.
Yeah, and we did that one. We talked about it, but I did the vote by email because of the time at our Monday meeting. I only was able to cover the first one.
That's all right. And sending the vote off to Olivia is the right way to do it.
Yes, and I did do that a little while ago before the meeting.
All right, so we have two more questions. I didn't know who raised their hand first. So Andrew Stern, then Fernando. Andrew, you need to unmute and ask your question. Andrew Stern, are you there? All right, you want to, well, you're
There it is.
unmuting. Yeah.
There it is. It would not let me.
Yeah, Aggie, you need to let them unmute as I call on them. I'm not sure if you have that control or I do. I'm not sure.
So,
Okay, go ahead, Andrew.
okay, just my point is, I believe it's a good idea, Chris, what you're proposing. We always have this conversation of getting younger members and trying to get that done. And I think this is a great way to start that process. You're kind of, indoctrinating them, for lack of a better term, but you want to get them in the system, and ideally start them younger. Then they go through high school, they're Rotaract, and then they end up joining Rotary. So I think this is a good way to keep that focus live. That's it.
Great, thank you, Andrew.
And then I think Fernando has his hand up.
Yeah, I just wondered why, it wasn't clear to me why it was that Rotary International dropped this as a standing committee, and to understand the reasoning behind dropping it, because it seems to me that if they thought, as we evidently think, that it's important and valuable to have it, why was it dropped? Does anyone know?
Well, I have many thoughts. I have two that are more opinionated and then two that are more factual. So we'll stay with the factual ones. And those are, number one, according to a phone conversation that I had with Holger Knock, RI president, about a year ago, the RI board decided to cut the number of committees in half. At one, I believe he told me there were 65 or 66 committees at one point, and the committees have been reduced to half. And a lot of that was because of cost savings, that a lot of the committees met at least once a year in Evanston or at the international convention. But at the same time, since COVID started, I think we've learned that you can connect people around the world via Zoom, for a very nominal cost, if at all. So personally, I don't know if that argument is still a valid one. Secondly, and as I did state earlier, staff at RI felt that the committee was so focused, and even, as I referenced earlier, Mitty had shared with me, or Mitty was co-chair of that committee a few years back, and he had said that 90% of the work focused on Rotaract anyway. So even though Interact was there in name, it wasn't really focused upon. So I don't know, Mitty, not to put you on the spot, but if you have any thoughts, feel free to chime in.
Any thoughts, Mitty, before I call on Cindy? You want to unmute, Mitty?
Oh, okay.
So
I can unmute myself now.
Yeah.
Sorry. So, I mean, Chris's thoughts are, I think, aligned with what I'm thinking. The other element to that maybe missed is just, so the Rotaract and Interact committee, when it was together as a standing committee, and not just the Rotaract committee, was half Rotarians and half Rotaractors. And they looked for Rotaractors and Rotarians who did have past program experiences. So either they were an Interactor at one point or were a Rotaractor at one point if they're on the Rotarian side. And it would be great if any of the Rotaractors had Interact experience as well. But that being said, it's understanding that it's very hard, especially in the US, to have a minor travel to Evanston for a meeting, as well as to just involve a minor in a lot of the meetings, just for legal reasons. So that's part of the reason that it was just more Rotaract focused. But I think it's a great idea for us to have a Interact committee. I think it makes sense to actually be split off from the Rotaract committee, considering the Rotaract committee puts on an actual pre-convention at the RI convention every year, and that's most of the work they do, as well as making recommendations to the board on Rotaract matters. So, I mean, I think the Ignite makes sense. I think most of us on the committee were sad to see the split and for them to remove Interact from the committee name, but that was a board decision.
All right, well, thank you for the insight. Cindy, did you have your hand up from before? Or do you still want to say something? And you need to unmute again, I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm done.
Oh, okay. Anyone else out there before we move on?
I'd like to make a comment, Judy. The process is important in terms of you submitting your club's vote to Olivia, and make sure that you submit a vote for both of the proposals. One for moving the Interact age down, and the other for forming an Interact committee in RI. So the question has come up, but how should clubs go about making that decision? And my position is that may vary per club, depending on the size of the club or whatever. But as president of the club, you are standing behind whatever process it caused you to come up with your vote. Whether that was a vote of the entire membership, whether it was a vote of the board of directors, or some other process that your club feels is the right process. But the important thing is that you're going to be held responsible that there is a process in your club that came up with this vote. So you need to feel comfortable standing behind that.
Joe, what happens if a club doesn't vote? What's the structure of that?
If a club doesn't vote, that would be considered not voting. It would be in the negative.
It'd be like, okay, and that's
Is
what
it,
I want
is
to.
it a no or an abstain, I guess is a question.
Club can abstain if they want, but the requirement is that a majority of clubs need to approve each one of these two proposals.
So if they don't submit something, it's the equivalent of a no vote. That's the point I
Right.
want to make.
That's the way I look at it.
Okay.
All right, and so thank you, Joe. It's good to have you here for clarification. Stuart does have his hand up again. You had something to say, Stuart? I need to unmute again.
Yeah, no, Orin asked it. It's fine. I lowered my
Oh.
hand.
Okay. So thank you, Joe. We glad to have you around for this. Anything else for Chris before we move on?
I want to say thank you so much for the opportunity to present. It's been quite an interesting process, and I will say I appreciate Joe spearheading, or not spearheading, but shepherding me and my club through the process.
Well, thank you for taking it on. So Greg, it's yours.
Chris, thank you for being here to answer the questions of the clubs. That's my understanding too for Orin is we need 31 yeses. So a non-vote is a no.
Okay.
We need 31 yeses in order to move this forward. The only comment I will make about the age thing is that it was when I first read it, I was thinking that was young also. But just like you don't have to have an Interact club to be a Rotary club, you don't have to go down to age 5 to do this. If you wanted to extend it, you could say we want to do it to 8 years old or 6 years old or 10 years old, and that's where we would set it. So all Chris is trying to do is get sanctioning from RI to allow clubs to do this, and how the club uses that is up to the club. So that's just my comment on that. We only have a couple of minutes left, so
So Greg, I'm sorry, there is one more question on the procedure. Carolyn asks, I guess this is for Joe, how firm is the November 15th date for clubs to vote?
Well, you know, Greg and I set that as a arbitrary date, but you know, I think we need to stick by that unless there's some really good reason why a club needs to, you know, if their board meets on the 16th and they vote then, I think we could make allowances for that. But the reason for that date is that we have to submit this by the end of December, and usually there are little tweaks that need to take place on these proposals. We need to give enough time for the committee on the Council of Legislation to review whatever we submit and send it back to us if necessary for us to tweak.
We almost got off this topic, but Fernando has one more question. Fernando, unmute Fernando.
Thank you. I just wanted to make sure I understood clearly. Even if you vote yes on this, it does not mean that your club has to initiate or undertake this kind of activity. Is that correct?
Right.
So that and then it can be by vote of the board, not necessarily the vote of the entire membership. Is that correct?
Yes.
Because we've got 450 members and it's tough to get that many to
Right.
respond in the time that you need. So, and also our board meeting, I think, is after November 15th.
We can take that into consideration as long as it's near that. And I think some clubs, especially large clubs, with the approval of the president, could have you know, your youth committee be the group that is looking at this and making a decision, so long as your board doesn't object to that.